The badge scanner beeped red. The volunteer manning the registration desk looked at the scanner, then at the man who had just held his wrist over it, then back at the scanner, with the particular sequence of expressions that accompanied a piece of equipment delivering an inconvenient result. She said, "I'm sorry, it's not reading. Do you have your confirmation email?" The man standing at the registration desk of the Vanguard Tech Summit was wearing a plain, dark hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of clean white sneakers that said nothing about themselves. He was in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and the particular quality of presence that came not from size or volume, but from a specific kind of steadiness. The steadiness of someone who had been in enough rooms to know that the most useful thing you could do in most rooms was stay exactly yourself. Beside him, holding a lanyard she had been given at the door because she was his guest, and guests got lanyards before they got past the registration desk, was his 11-year-old daughter, Imani. She was wearing a dark green jacket and the expression of a child who had arrived at a technology conference for the first time and was conducting an inventory of everything she could see from this position, which was considerable. His name was Devlin Cross. He did not have a confirmation email on his phone because the confirmation he had received had come through his executive assistant and had been printed and was sitting in a folder on his desk at home, which was a failure of logistics he was prepared to acknowledge. What he had on his phone was a different kind of evidence, but he was not yet at the point in the conversation where evidence was necessary. He said, "I don't have the email with me. My name is Devlin Cross. I should be registered as a keynote speaker, the volunteer, whose name was Amy, and who had been managing this registration desk for 4 hours and was operating on the specific tired efficiency of someone who had processed several hundred badges and was not expecting the next one to require additional thought. Looked at her screen. She looked at it for a moment. She said, "I'm not seeing a Devlin Cross in the speaker registry." He said, "Could you check the attendee list as well?" She checked. She looked at the screen with the focused attention of someone who wanted to find the answer and was not finding it. She said, "I'm not seeing your name on either list. Do you have a ticket confirmation?" Devlin said, "I don't have it with me. I'm the opening keynote speaker. My session starts at 9 tomorrow morning." Amy said, "I understand, but without a badge or a confirmation, I'm not able to process your entry." She said it with the genuine regret of someone who was following a protocol she had not designed and was finding it inadequate for the current situation. Our policy is very strict about unregistered attendees, especially for speaker access. She looked at Imani briefly, with the automatic reflex of someone noticing a child in an adult situation and assessing whether the child was all right. Imani was looking at the banner above the registration desk that read Vanguard Tech Summit, Building the Future, and was apparently deciding what she thought of the phrase. Devlin said, "Is there an event coordinator I can speak with?" Amy said, "Let me call someone for you." She spoke into her headset with the brevity of someone passing a situation to the next level because the current level had run out of tools. They waited. Imani came away from the banner and stood beside her father and said quietly, "What does Keynote mean?" Devlin said, "It means the first major talk, the one that sets the tone for everything else," Imani said. "And you're doing it?" He said, "Tomorrow morning." "Yes." She considered this. She said, "But they don't know that." He said, "They seem to be having trouble finding the record of it." She looked at the registration desk with the expression of a child running a diagnostic on a situation. She said, "That seems like a significant mistake." He said, "It does." She said, "On their part?" He said, "Yes." She nodded. She had allocated the responsibility correctly and moved on. She returned to her inventory of the conference space, which was considerable. The Vanguard Tech Summit occupied the entire ground floor and 2 upper levels of the Pemberton Convention Center, a space that had been designed with the specific ambition of making large numbers of people feel simultaneously part of something and individually attended to. Exhibition booths lined the main hall. Breakout rooms opened off the central corridor. A stage visible through open double doors at the far end of the hall was currently being configured for tomorrow's sessions. Technicians moving around it with the focused purpose of people who knew exactly what they were building toward. Imani looked at the stage from across the hall. She said, "Is that where you'll be?" Devlin followed her gaze. "Yes," he said. She looked at it for a moment. She said, "It's bigger than I thought it would be." He said, "They usually are." She said, "Are you nervous?" He thought about it honestly. The way he thought about things his daughter asked, because she asked real questions and they deserved real answers. He said, "Not about the talk. A little about the situation at the desk." She looked at him. She said, "Why?" "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "No. But being in a situation where your word is the only thing you have and someone's not. Sure, your word is sufficient is uncomfortable regardless of whether you've done anything wrong, Imani." Processed this with the seriousness she brought to most. Information worth having. She said, "That's not fair." He said, "No, it's not." She said, "But you're still calm," he said. "Being calm is the most useful thing I can be right now." She looked at him for a moment with the clear-eyed attention she used when she was deciding whether something was true. She decided it was. She returned to the stage. The event coordinator arrived 7 minutes later. Her name was Rachel, and she was in her late 30s, moving with the compressed efficiency of someone who was managing 17 things simultaneously and had just been handed an 18th. She came to the registration desk and looked at Devlin and Imani and at Amy's screen, and at the situation with the rapid assessment of someone whose job was to solve problems before they expanded. She said, "I'm Rachel, Deputy Event Coordinator." "What's happening?" Devlin said. "My name is Devlin Cross. I'm scheduled to deliver the opening keynote tomorrow morning. I don't have my confirmation with me and my badge isn't reading," Rachel said. Devlin Cross. She said the name the way people said names they were cross-referencing internally, checking it against something they might have stored. She looked at Amy's screen. She looked at it with the focused attention of someone who knew how to read event management software and was applying that knowledge. Then she looked up. She said, "I'm showing a Devlin C on the keynote slot." She looked at him. "Could that be you?" Devlin said, "My middle initial is C, yes. Cross is my last name." Rachel said, "The entry in the system has your first name and middle initial only. Someone made an error during data entry." She said this with the flatness of someone who was simultaneously identifying a failure and accepting responsibility for the environment that produced it. She looked at Imani. She looked at Devlin. She said, "I'm sorry you were held up. Let me get your badge issued now." She went to work. Amy went back to her scanning with the relief of someone whose situation had been resolved and who was grateful for the resolution. Rachel moved with the efficient warmth of someone who was good at her job and wanted the next 10 minutes to demonstrate it. Imani watched Rachel work with the attentive interest of someone who found competence genuinely interesting to observe. She said to her father under her breath, "She's fast." Devlin said, "She is." Imani said, "I like people who are fast when they need to be." He said, "Me too." The badge came through. Rachel handed it to Devlin with a lanyard and an apology that was direct and undecorated, and therefore more effective than a longer one would have been. She said, "Your green room is on the 2nd floor. I'll walk you up myself." Devlin said, "Thank you." They followed Rachel through the main hall. Imani walked beside her father and looked at everything they passed with the systematic attention of someone building a mental map. She looked at the exhibition booths and the breakout room signs and the people moving through the space with the specific purposefulness of people who were at a conference and knew where they were going. She looked at the stage again as they passed the open double doors, closer now, the full scale of it visible. She said, "How many people will be in there?" Rachel answered before Devlin could. She said, "Around 1,800 for the keynote." Imani looked at the stage. She said, "And you're going to stand up there in front of 1,800 people?" Devlin said, "That's the plan." She said, "And tell them what?" He said, "What I think the future looks like, and what I think people need to build it correctly." Imani thought about this. She said, "What does it look like?" Devlin said, "I'll tell you tonight, so you can tell me if I'm wrong before I say it to 1,800 people." Imani looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding if she was being included genuinely or as a performance of inclusion. She decided genuine. She said, "Okay, I'll be honest." He said, "I know you will. That's why I'm asking." They reached the green room on the 2nd floor. It was a well-appointed space, designed for speakers to decompress and prepare, with comfortable seating and good lighting, and a window that looked down onto the main hall below. Devlin could see the registration desk from here, where Amy was processing a line of attendees with the steady efficiency of someone back in her rhythm. He looked at the desk for a moment. He thought about the 7 minutes they had stood there and the specific quality of that standing, of being a person whose word was not sufficient, and whose name was not in the system, and whose presence at a conference he was opening the following morning had been a bureaucratic error rather than a welcome. He thought about Imani saying that seems like a significant mistake on their part, with the precise allocation of responsibility that she had always been good at, and that he had never once tried to discourage in her because he believed that the ability to see clearly where accountability lay was one of the most useful things a person could develop. He thought about his own father, who had been a software engineer for 30 years. The only black engineer on his team for 22 of those years, and who had told Devlin once, sitting on the back porch on a summer evening when Devlin was about Imani's age, that the thing about being the person in the room who others had not expected to be there was that you could spend your energy managing their surprise, or you could spend it doing the work. He had said you could not do both fully. You had to choose. And then he had said, I chose the work. Every time. And look where the work got us. He had been pointing at the house. The house was good. It had taken 30 years of choosing the work, but the house was good. Devlin had chosen the work. He had been choosing it since he was 23, when he founded a software company in a shared workspace with 2 other people and a collectively insufficient amount of sleep, and had spent the next 6 years building it into something that people used, and then into something that people depended on, and then into something that redefined the category it operated in and was acquired, when Devlin was 31, for a number that appeared in the business press and that he had read about in the way you read about things that are happening to you, but that still feels slightly abstract. He had started the second company at 33, the third at 37. The third was the one that had put him on the stage at the Vanguard Tech Summit, speaking to 1,800 people tomorrow, mourning about what the future of infrastructure technology looked like and what it required of the people building it. He had not made his name widely recognizable because recognizable names attracted certain kinds of attention that he had never wanted and that seemed to him to be in tension with the work. He had given interviews when they served a purpose and declined them when they didn't. He had a public profile that was accurate but minimal. That said what he had built without saying much about how he looked while building it. This approach had consequences that he accepted as part of the trade-off, including the consequence of standing at a registration desk and being told there was no record of him, and the consequence of his daughter saying that seems like a significant mistake. On their part, with the precision of someone who had been taught to see clearly, he had accepted those consequences because they were real and because pretending they did not exist was a form of dishonesty he was not willing to practice, and because the alternative, performing visibility so that rooms recognized him before he had spoken, seemed to him to be the kind of energy that could not simultaneously power the work. He sat in the green room with Imani and looked down at the main hall below and thought about tomorrow morning. About the 1,800 people who would be in the room, about the things he was going to say about the future of infrastructure technology, which were things he had been thinking about for 2 years and had been refining for 6 months, and which he believed were true and important and worth 1,800. People's attention on a Tuesday morning. Imani had found the refreshments table and was examining the options with the systematic approach she brought to most decisions. She said without turning around, "Are you thinking about your talk?" He said partly. She said, "What's the other part?" He said, "The thing that happened at the desk downstairs." She turned. She looked at him with the direct attention she used when she had something real to say and was deciding how to say it. She said, "Are you going to let it make the talk different?" He thought about that. He said, "How do you mean?" She said, "Like, are you going to be angrier up there because of what happened down here? Or sadder? Or like you need to prove something?" He looked at his daughter. He said, "No." She said, "Good. Because the talk should be about what you actually think, not about what happened at the desk." He said, "You're right." She said, "I know." She turned back to the refreshments table and selected something with the finality of a person who had made a considered decision. She said, "I want to sit in the front row tomorrow." He said, "I'll make sure you have a seat in the front row." She said, "I'm going to watch your face the whole time." "Not the slides?" He said, "Why?" She said, "Because the slides will say what you prepared. Your face will say what you actually think." Devlin Cross sat in the green room of the Vanguard Tech Summit and looked at his 11-year-old daughter and felt the specific quality of being known completely by someone who loved you without any complication around it. She was going to sit in the front row tomorrow and watch his face and know the difference between what he had prepared and what he actually thought. And she was going to remember both. And one day she was going to use the knowledge of that difference in something she built. He said, "Go easy on me." She said, "I'll be honest. That's what you asked for." He said, "I know. That's why I said go easy." She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. The smile she smiled when she found something genuinely funny rather than politely amusing, and went back to her refreshment. Rachel knocked and came in 20 minutes later. She sat across from Devlin with the direct attention she had shown from the beginning and said, "I want to address what happened downstairs properly. Not just with an apology." Devlin said, "I'm listening." She said, "The data entry error is being fixed immediately, and I'm implementing a secondary verification process for all speaker registrations before the event starts tomorrow. But that's the technical response." She paused. "The thing I want to address separately is the 7 minutes. Not the error. The way those 7 minutes felt." Devlin looked at her. She said, "I watched the footage. I wanted to understand what happened from the beginning, and what I saw was that you were assessed before you were heard. You came to the desk and something about how you presented was used to make a judgment before you had finished your sentence. The error in the system gave that judgment a structural support it wouldn't otherwise have had. But the judgment was there before the error became visible." She said this plainly, with the specific plainness of someone who had watched the footage and decided that honesty was more useful than management. Devlin said, "That's an accurate account." She said, "I'm going to address it in the volunteer briefing tomorrow morning, not by naming what happened tonight, by making explicit what this event is supposed to be and what assumptions are not compatible with that." Devlin said, "What is this event supposed to be?" She said, "A room where the quality of someone's thinking is the only credential that matters, where the person who walks in a hoodie and the person who walks in a suit are assessed by the same standard, which is what they bring to the room intellectually. That's what Vanguard is supposed to be." She paused. "Tonight didn't reflect that." Devlin said, "No, it didn't." She said, "It will tomorrow." He believed her, not because the words were reassuring, but because she had watched the footage and told him what she saw in it and had not softened it into something more comfortable. And that was the action of someone who was serious about the problem rather than its management. Rachel left. Imani had been listening from the refreshments table with the attentiveness she brought to conversations worth following, which was most of them. She said, "She's good." Devlin said, "She is." Imani said, "She watched the video." He said, "Yes." Imani said, "That matters. Watching the video matters." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because it means she wanted to know what actually happened, not just what someone told her happened." Devlin looked at his daughter. He thought about choosing the work. He thought about 30 years on a back porch in a house that had been worth it. He thought about 1,800 people in the morning and a front row seat and a face that would be watched by someone who knew the difference between prepared and true. He said, "When you build things, remember that." She said, "Remember what?" He said, "That watching the video matters, going back to see what actually happened, rather than what you were told happened or what you assumed happened. That matters in every kind of building." Imani looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I'll remember." He said, "I know you will." She said, "Can we get dinner?" "I'm hungry." He said, "Yes." "We can get dinner," she said. "And then you'll tell me about the future?" He said, "And then I'll tell you about the future." She said, "And I'll tell you if you're wrong." He said, "And you'll tell me if I'm wrong." She picked up her green jacket and her lanyard and her refreshment, and they walked out of the green room and down the corridor toward the elevator, and the conference went on around them. People moving with purpose through a building full of ideas about what came next. And Devlin Cross walked through it in his plain dark hoodie and his clean white sneakers, unremarkable in the specific way that people were unremarkable when they had decided a long time ago that the work was the point, and the work did not need them to perform in advance of it. Tomorrow morning he would stand on a stage in front of 1,800 people and say what he thought the future looked like and what it required of the people building it. Tonight he was going to get dinner with his daughter and tell her about the future and find out where she thought he was wrong. He was genuinely looking forward to both. Some people made themselves visible so that rooms would recognize them before they opened their mouths. Some people did the work and let the work arrive first and trusted that the room would catch up. Devlin Cross had made his choice a long time ago. He had never once reconsidered it. And tomorrow morning, 1,800 people were going to hear exactly why. They found a restaurant 2 blocks from the convention center, a quiet place with good light and the specific warmth of somewhere that had been open long enough to know what it was. Imani chose a booth by the window and sat across from her father and opened the menu with the seriousness of someone about to make a consequential decision. She made it in approximately 90 seconds, which was fast by her standards, which meant she was ready to talk. She said, "Okay, the future." Devlin set his menu down. He said, "The future of infrastructure technology is invisible." Imani looked at him. She said, "What does that mean?" He said, "The best infrastructure is the kind you don't know is there. The road you drive on, the water that comes out of the tap, the electricity that's available when you flip the switch. You don't think about any of that until it fails. The goal is to build things so well that no one ever has to think about them. They just work." Imani thought about this. She said, "Like the ceiling in a room." Devlin looked at her. He said, "What?" She said, "Like a ceiling that's designed really well. You don't notice it, but it changes how the whole room feels." He looked at his daughter across the booth table and felt the specific quality of an idea arriving from an unexpected direction and being exactly right. He said, "Yes, exactly like that." "Where did you get that?" She shrugged. She said, "I just thought of it." He said, "It's a better version of the point than the version I had." She looked at him to see if he was performing a compliment. He was not. She said, "So should you say it that way? The ceiling thing?" He said, "I think I might." She said, "I want credit." He said, "You'll get credit." She said, "In front of 1,800 people?" He said, "In front of 1,800 people." She sat with this for a moment, appearing to assess whether the offer was genuine. She decided it was. She said, "Okay, keep going. What else about the future?" He told her. He talked through the 3 main points of his keynote, not in the formal language of the prepared talk, but in the direct, undecorated language he used with his daughter, which was the best version of any language because it stripped away the performance and left only the substance. She listened without interrupting until he finished each point and then asked questions, sometimes 1 question and sometimes 2. And the questions were the kind that came from genuine engagement rather than the performance of engagement, the kind that pressed on the places where the thinking was not yet fully resolved. On the second point, she said, "But if the infrastructure is invisible, how do you make people care about building it well? If they never see it, why would they invest in making it good?" Devlin sat with the question. He said, "That's the hardest part." She said, "I know. That's why I asked it." He said, "You build a culture that cares about the thing for its own sake, where the people building the infrastructure take pride in the invisibility of it, where the best outcome is that no one notices what you made." She looked at him. She said, "That's hard to sell." He said, "It's very hard to sell." She said, "How do you do it?" He said, "You find people who already understand it, and you put them in rooms together, and you show them work that was done at that standard, and you create the conditions for the standard to be desirable rather than just correct." Imani turned this over. She said, "Like tonight." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Rachel." She watched the video. She didn't have to. She could have just apologized and moved on. But she went back and looked at what actually happened, and then she came and told you what she saw. That's the kind of caring about the thing for its own sake that you're talking about, right? Devlin looked at his daughter across the booth table in the quiet restaurant with the good light. He said, "Yes, that's exactly right." She said, "So it exists." People who do that exist. He said they do. She said then the talk should say that. Not just that we need them, that they already exist and we just have to find them and put them in rooms together. Devlin. Cross sat with his 11-year-old daughter on a Tuesday evening in a restaurant 2 blocks from the Vanguard Tech Summit and understood that his keynote had just been improved by someone who had been inside a convention center for less than 2 hours and had never attended a technology conference before in her life. He said, "I'm going to need more than the front row seat," she said. "What do you mean?" He said, "I might need you to come up on stage." She looked at him with the expression of someone assessing whether they were being teased.